Well, good morning. Good morning. I'm glad you're here with us today. Today we're going to talk about something. It's one of those things you either really like it or you really don't like it, but we're going to talk today about being responsible. And before you kind of start redefining that, I get it. I get why people don't want to be responsible. Jerry Seinfeld actually talked about it, a comedian from the 80s and 90s. He talked about the idea that really nobody wants to be responsible for anything. And the way he illustrates it is so good. He says, responsible, who wants to be responsible? The first thing anybody asks when something goes wrong is, who's responsible for this, right? I mean, we don't want to be that. We push away from the idea of being responsible. Maybe the most extreme version of this happened in Spain, and you may not have heard about this, but a man named Joaquin Garcia in 2004, a long time ago, was named the project manager for a huge water development and water treatment plant that was supposed to be built in the nation of Spain for their national water service. And so he started the work in 2004, and he was doing it and going along. But along about 2010, and it still wasn't done yet, but he just decided, I don't like this anymore. This work is beneath me. I'm not going to do this anymore. And he just stayed home and started reading philosophy. But he kept collecting his paycheck. He just didn't tell anybody that he wasn't going to be doing this anymore. Well, over time, the water treatment plant was completed and brought into service, and they started using it. And then eventually, some of the employees from the utility said, hey, do we realize Joaquin has been with us, a valuable employee, for over 25 years? And so they planned this big ceremony and this big celebration. They brought all these gifts to the water treatment plant, and they were going to celebrate with him for 25 years of service. Except when they got there, nobody knew who he was or where he went because he hadn't been to work in 15 years, and nobody really knew who was responsible for finishing the water treatment plant. It didn't end well. Mr. Garcia had some bills to repay after a while. And that's what happens when we push away from responsibility. Sooner or later, it catches up with us. Now, we're talking about responsibility in a little bit of a different context today. We're talking about responsibility when it comes to relationships. And again, I know a lot of times our initial thought is, I don't want to be responsible for more. I don't want to be responsible for even more people or other things. I'm responsible for enough as it is. I don't need more stuff on my plate. And so the knee jerk a lot of times is to push away from it. But let me just encourage you this morning. That's actually a mistake. Because when we push away from being responsible to other people and responsible for other people, what happens is we cut ourselves off from belonging, from having that sense that I have my people. There are people with me in this thing, in this life, that I've got my tribe, my peeps, the people that are with me. I've got those people as part of my life. If we're not willing to be responsible to them and responsible for them, we miss out on this sense of belonging. You say, well, why does that matter? What's really important about that? Belonging is, kind of the highbrow philosophical definition. Belonging is knowing that I am seen and valued and appreciated. Here's where it comes down to in kind of brass tacks, right? If you belong and your flight gets changed, you know who to call to pick you up from the airport. Because you have people, right? If you have a schedule that is empty, but you don't have anybody to eat with, you don't have anybody to do anything on weekends, then you don't belong to anyone. If you have belonging and something big happens in your life, you have people to talk to. If you don't have belonging and something big happens, you don't know who to talk to. You see, belonging really, really matters, actually. But as I said, it only comes with being responsible for and responsible to other people. And you've already experienced this. You have. Even if you didn't really think about it in those terms, you've experienced this. If you were in the military, you experienced it with your squad, right? If you grew up in a home with several people in a family, you experienced it with your family. Maybe you were on a team in junior high or high school, or even later, you were on a sports team. You experienced this with your teammates. Maybe even at work, if you've got some close people you work with and you count on and they count on you, you have this idea of belonging, your people. We value it. We love it. And here's the thing. We know this. It comes when we go through hard things together. It doesn't come when everything is easy. The way we get belonging is having that responsibility tested. We're responsible to, we're responsible for. And when that thing gets tested and it turns out to be good and valuable, all of a sudden, we have our people. We have that connection. We belong somewhere. In essence, what we're trying to do is move from me to we. And moving from me to we moves us into belonging. Now, last week, even if you weren't here, it's fine. We can catch you up real quick. Last week, we talked about this idea of community, that belonging moves us into community. And community, what we said last week was community is a relationship. And the reason we changed words is because people mean so many different things when they say relationship. When we talk about community, I'm talking about the people that you do life with. The people that are, as far as you can tell, are always going to be part of your life. That's where we have community. Those most important, most meaningful, most connected relationships. And when we move into community, we move into life. The life God created us to live. Yeah, we can be alive, we can get by, we can survive, we can get through. But if we want to live, if we want the life God intended for us to live, it happens in community. And so it's always been this way. I mean, every relationship has always been formed with this idea of responsibility kind of at its core, that I'm responsible to you and I'm responsible for you. Every good relationship has this, and it's no different for the church. As a matter of fact, the very first church, the earliest church, we read about it in Acts, and I want to show you kind of how they experienced it here in just a second. But this church, at its core, really did two things. They followed Jesus, and they loved each other. Those were the two things that they did. And inherent in that, kind of a pillar of that, was this idea of responsibility and belonging. They all kind of went hand in hand. You couldn't do one without the other. And so in Acts chapter 2, and you don't need to turn there because we're just going to put it on the screen for you because I want you to kind of just get a quick summary of what's going on. In Acts chapter 2, they describe what's going on. Acts 2:45, it says all the believers were together and had everything in common. Now, if you just stopped right there and you don't know the story, you might think, well, that sounds like kind of a fairy tale Disney thing, right? Oh, they were all together and they had everything in common and they lived happily ever after and everything was great. And especially if you're like me, you might be a little skeptical and you kind of push back and you're like, come on, really? I mean, everybody's together, everybody's getting along, everybody has everything in common. And you might be a little skeptical and think, okay, that's just the author kind of taking some liberties. But the very next sentence, he goes, no, this was real. They sold property and possession. They sold their stuff to give to anyone who had need. Oh, okay, wait a minute. No, this is real. Like, they were selling land. In our terms, they were selling cars. They sold off some of their investments. They sold some stuff when they came across somebody that had a need. They were responsible to and responsible for each other. The fancy name for it is an interpersonal responsibility. Here's what I think it means. Here's how I interpret that. They recognized something. That these people gathered together, this called out group of people that were following Jesus together, they recognized something really, really critically important. That every single person had some gifts that they could contribute. And we're not just talking about money. I mean, they had gifts, they had abilities, they had wisdom, they had experiences. They had stuff that they could contribute to the others. And they recognized this. They also recognized something else very important and just as important as the gift side. That they all also had gaps. Like, I have things that I can contribute. I have gifts that I can contribute to everybody else. At the same time, I realize I have gaps that I need to close. These gaps in my life that have been holding me back, that have been messing me up, that have been costing me. The things I've been trying to fix on my own for a long time, the things I ignored for quite a while because I wanted to pretend like they weren't real, the things that keep sabotaging me, I have some gaps. In essence, it's no different for us. We all have gifts we can contribute, and we all have gaps that we need to close. And that was at the core of this early church. And I believe, especially if you're a follower of Jesus, this has to be at the core of your life today. A recognition. I've got some gifts. I mean, I'm not hiding anything. There's some things I can do. And at the same time, there's some places I struggle. There's some things I just can't manage on my own. I can't do them well. They're holding me back from this life that I want to live. And I think the real trick is almost everybody, almost anybody, even if they're not followers of Jesus, could agree with that. The idea of let's all be together, let's work together, let's do team, let's be unified, let's all conquer this together, yay, until somebody, has a different opinion or whatever. Like, yeah, okay, everybody has value, everybody has some needs, that's fine. But how do you put it into practice? Because whether you're an extrovert or an introvert, here's something that you know. You need to belong. Now, for some of you, if you're an extrovert, yeah, I need to belong, and I need about 700 people in that cloud of belonging, right? I love being around people. I love hanging out with people. I don't feel like I belong unless there's this huge crowd of people with me. And some of you are like, I need 1 person, most of the time, but sometimes I don't even need one, right? I need one person that I know I belong with, that's my person, that's my people. So it doesn't really matter. We all have this drive to belong. And again, introvert or extrovert, one of the things we understand is there's no way to have that belonging unless I'm willing to engage. I got to be willing to engage other people. If I won't engage other people in any way, shape, or form, then I'm never going to have that belonging that I need so much. I mean, there's a longing to belong that's real, and I'm never going to find that if I don't find a way to engage. The problem is, again, I think most of that's common knowledge. The problem is we often don't know how. It's not that we don't want to. It's just we're not exactly sure. How does this work, especially if you move it into the context of faith as a follower of Jesus? What does that look like? Because it's kind of tough. If you've got a Bible, we're going to be in Romans chapter 12. And in Romans 12, one of the things we find, or if you've got the app, you can follow along there. But the very first part of Romans 12, there's this incredible description of what happens when you become a Jesus follower. And it is inspiring. In essence, it's saying that you get a whole new life. That when you are reconciled back to God through Christ, everything changes. You have a different life. You don't conform to the old things. You don't look like everybody else. You don't act like everybody else. You have the life that you've been waiting for. You have the life that God has created you to live, and you get to engage this in a special and powerful way. And then, in Romans chapter 12, verse 3, he starts to talk about and paint a picture of, but what does it actually look like? Because again, I think all of us love that idea. The question is, how? How do you get there? Romans chapter 12, verse 3, he starts to give us some instruction. He says, For by the grace given to me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment, in accordance with the faith that God has distributed to each of you. I'll stop there because we're going to take this a piece at a time. In essence, what he's saying, this whole idea of moving from me to we, from just me by myself to belonging and being connected and having relationship and being responsible, it actually starts with me. It doesn't start with me doing everything for everybody or changing everything about me so that I get along or conforming to whatever else everybody else is doing. It doesn't start there. It starts with me. But it's not always easy because it's me looking in the mirror, looking hard at the mirror. Not through rose-colored glasses. I'm a pretty big deal, I'm a great guy and I got a lot of things going for me. And not the other way either of, I don't know, I just barely survive. I get by. I'm not very important. I'm not very valuable. It's neither one of those things. It's a sober mind. It's an open and clear heart that says, I see myself for what I am and what I am not. What I am, yes, I have some gifts. As I said, we got gifts and gaps. I've got some things I can contribute, things that I can do, special gifts that God's given me, things that make a difference. But I also see there's some holes, some things that have held me back. Like I said earlier, there's things that I've tried to fix, but I haven't been able to fix them. Not yet, not on my own. I'm going to have some help. I can't fix those on my own, by myself. When I think about that in my context, and I understand your story is going to be a little different than mine, but as I start kind of looking at my connection with you and with this church through that lens, here's what I see. I see that I have some gifts, some things that I can contribute. I can teach the Bible. I can give spiritual leadership. I also see a long list of gaps, okay, of places where as much as I wish these things were different, they're not. As much as I would like to change them, I haven't been able to change them by myself. I mean, God has worked through me and worked through other people to make some progress and help me close those gaps, but I couldn't do it on my own. I mean, I need you. I need you to help me see differently because without you, I tend to go too fast. I tend to leave people behind. I need you to shine a light on the people that are in the margins that I would walk by without seeing. I need you to help remind me how beautiful mercy is when it's done right and done well, because that's hard for me. I need you to walk alongside me and tell me that, you know what, we need to give room and space for people to heal. Give them that opportunity. Because some of my gaps look like moving on, leaving people behind, and just going forward. Those are gaps. I'm not proud of them. I'm not glad that I have them, but I know that I have them. And that's exactly what it means to see what I am and what I am not. And that's all of us. We all have that happening in our hearts and in our lives. We have things that we can contribute. We have things that we need help with. And there's a couple dangerous spots when it comes to this idea. Because sometimes when we look in the mirror, we may like what we see, we may not like what we see. But a lot of times, if we're not careful, we spend more time on the excuses than we do on reality. And let me give you an example. We might look in the mirror and say, yeah, I've got some gifts to contribute. I'd really like to. I want to be. I want to engage. I want to be responsible. I love the idea. Everything sounds great, but I'm really busy. I mean, I got a lot going on. There's just a lot of stuff. I got friends, I got family, I got work, I'm busy. It's not that I don't want to, I really do. But I can't. Permit me for a minute to be really honest. Come on. Yes, you can. You can find time to do anything you feel like is important. We all know that. God's telling you, if you're going to move from me to we, if you're going to have this sense of belonging, if you're going to be responsible to and responsible for other people, you're going to have to find time to do that. Because you have some gifts that other people need you to contribute because it's going to help close their gaps. You do have time for that. And sometimes we go the other way. We kind of get all Eeyore, right? Oh, I don't know. I don't have much. I don't have anything. I don't know. Nobody wants to hear what I think. Nobody really cares. I don't think I could really make a difference. I'm not. Stop it. Stop it. God made you unique. He made you special. He created you on purpose with a purpose. You absolutely have something to contribute. Don't buy into that lie. But maybe more dangerous than either one of those is, you know what? I get it. You're right. I got some gifts, probably got some gaps, yeah. And you know what? I'm going to do it on my own. I'll be better off if I do it myself. Because, people, right? I mean, I'll do it on my own. I'm going to make sure I find this belonging and responsibilities and gifts and gaps. I get all the things you're talking about, but I'm just going to follow Jesus on my own. I got it worked out. And yet, for some reason, we can't find that anywhere when it comes to belonging, when it comes to gathering, when it comes to being responsible for and responsible to. We can't ever find that idea of, I got it, I'll handle it, I'll do it on my own. So we've got to recognize who we are, where we are, the gifts that we have, and the gaps that we have. And he goes on, look at verse 4. He says it this way, for just as each one of us has one body with many members, and these members do not all have the same function, so in Christ we, though many, form one body, and each member belongs to all the others. Let's stop there. Just another little thought here he's using. And this makes so much sense. I mean, if you think about your own body, you have an ear, you have a heart, you have an ankle, right? They don't do the same thing. They don't act the same way. Yet nobody is willing to get rid of any of them, right? I mean, nobody's like, yeah, you can take that. Yeah, you can have that. I don't need that. I don't want that. Throughout the whole New Testament, one of the things you see happen over and over and over, all of the apostles, all the early followers of Jesus, they compared the church, this gathered group of people, just like us. They compared the church to a body. Yeah, there's different parts of it. They have different functions. They do different things. But nobody's willing to get rid of any of it. And I don't mean this negatively at all. Nobody is glad about losing part of it. Like if there's some kind of injury or disability or something, nobody's glad that they don't have that. We all want to be fully functioning. And here's the deal. You're never going to have the life that God created you to live apart from the people he put you around. And this church, this gathering, this group of people, we are never going to be all we could be without you. Because you have something to contribute. And at the same time, we can help you close some of the gaps that are available, that are present in your life. I love this word church that gets thrown in here in the next couple of passages. This idea of church, it's a Greek word. And one of the things that's really exciting about it to me is it means at its very root form, called out ones. It means the ones that are called out. Now, I love coming to church, and I love the fact that it's comfortable. I don't know if you've ever thought about this. The chairs are comfortable, the air conditioning is comfortable, the coffee is great, the band is wonderful. I mean, people are friendly. I hope you like coming here, and all of those are good things, but you realize that's not what we're called out to. We are called out to two simple things, to follow Jesus and love each other. That's what we're called out to. And there's just no other way to do that other than together, being responsible to and responsible for. You see, and here's something I want to drive home because I know so many people are wrestling with this right now. There's no such thing as a follower of Jesus following Jesus alone. You can't do it. It doesn't happen. And I know deconstruction and reconstruction, I'm constructing my faith, I'm doing all this stuff, and if you don't understand all that is, basically it's the idea of, I like Jesus, I don't like the church, I'm just gonna follow Jesus without the church. You can't do it. You can't do it. It wasn't designed that way. It's always going to be frustrating. It's always going to be less than it could be. It's always going to be something short of what God intended for you. Because you can't follow Jesus alone. He just did not create you that way. He didn't set it up to work that way. And I want to say something, and you're going to hear this and you're going to think, well, I don't know if I agree with that, and that's fine. But I have a feeling if you think deeply about it, you might decide that, well, he might be right. And it's very simply this. If you meet somebody who is also, if you're a follower of Jesus, and you meet somebody else who is a follower of Jesus, but they share none of your opinions, none of your priorities, and none of your politics, do you realize you have more in common with that person than you do somebody who shares every one of your opinions, your politics, and your priorities? You see, it isn't the small things that define us. It's the big things. And your politics, your priorities, and all those kinds of things, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying they're not important. They are important. But don't shrink down what it means to be transformed to a new life in Christ, to the level of something that's temporary. Because this is an eternal thing. We aren't fitting into the forms of the old world. We don't live the old life. Your destiny, your identity, everything about who you are has been changed. He's given you a new life. He's changed you. And that is so much more important and so much bigger than something as temporary as an opinion or a political issue or a priority that may end up changing in the next few years anyway. You have more in common with another follower of Jesus who agrees with you about nothing else than you do with somebody who agrees with you on everything but doesn't follow Jesus. It is that definitive. It is that powerful. And I want to talk to followers of Jesus for just a second. So if you're not, you can kind of just listen in. And if you want to gang up on us, that's fine. But we love this idea. If you're a follower of Jesus, you know that there's this idea that one day, someday, we're all going to be together. All in one place, every tribe, every tongue, every nation, every ethnicity, everybody that's ever followed Jesus all throughout history. And so many of us look at that and say, oh, what a beautiful picture. I can't wait. That's the way eternity is going to start. That's not the end. That's not the final place. That's where it begins. And we're so excited to look at that. But then if we're not careful, if we find out somebody that's a follower of Jesus that voted differently than we did, we get all disgusted. What? That's ridiculous. We have this beautiful image, but we don't have room for somebody that may have made a different choice than we did. We have this future and this destiny of unity and connection and being connected to God and each other. But you got a different opinion than I do, so I can't be near you. I can't hang out with you. I mean, you see the disconnection there. There's no such thing as a follower of Jesus who follows Jesus alone. He continues, one more idea about engaging. He says, it starts with me. It's a recognition that I am connected. And then in verse 6, he says, we have different gifts according to the grace given to each of us. If your gift is prophesying, then prophesy in accordance with your faith. If it's serving, then serve. If it's teaching, then teach. If it is to encourage, then give encouragement. If it is giving, then give generously. If it is to lead, do it diligently. If it is to show mercy, do it cheerfully. In essence, he's saying, look, everybody's got a role. Now, it's football season, and I know not everybody's a sports fan. You don't have to be a sports fan, and I thought about not talking about this because ASU got smoked last night, and the Cowboys are going to lose today, and it's a terrible football weekend. But if you watch football, here's what you know. They're trying to win. You may not know the rules. You may not understand the game. You might not know why they're doing what they're doing, but they're trying to win, right? They're trying to move forward. And you also know this. Not all of those guys on the field are the same. Some of them are really just a lot stronger than others, and they have a job. Some of them are a lot faster than others, and they have a different job. Some of them have amazing hand-eye coordination, and they have a different role. Everybody has a different role, but they're working together, and they're trying to win. And the point being made is when we engage, when we're responsible to each other and for each other, God is in the business of transforming us, and he uses different people with different gifts to bring that about and to close up those gaps that we talked about. See, for me, I look at it and I'm like, how am I going to be transformed if not for you? How is it going to happen if it's not with you and through you? It can't happen. I mean, who prays for me? Who encourages me? Who corrects me It just doesn't happen if you're not there. That's exactly what he's pointing out. Everybody has a role. Everybody has a spot. Everybody has some strengths, some gifts. And the best thing to do is not worry about is everybody else doing their job, but to do your job. To do the thing that God gave you to do and trust him to bring the people alongside of you that will help close your gaps as you try to give the gift of contributing to others. Now, I've been going to church my whole life. Some of you maybe haven't. Some of you maybe this is your first day. I'm super glad that you're here. I grew up in a church that we had a lot of sermons, a lot of preaching. And so for some of you, you're like, hey, I try to make it in once a month. I went to a church where we got 3 sermons a week, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. And that was for me anyway, about 50 weeks out of the year, right? And so if you've been to church a few times, I'm glad, I'm excited for you. I've been in the thousands, right? Okay, I've heard thousands and thousands and thousands of sermons, and I'm glad for it. But do you know what I remember the most? I remember the people. It's not all the sermons I've sat and heard. I know God's used them. I know they've made a difference. Don't get me wrong. But I remember the people. I remember the people that have walked alongside me. I remember the people that have been patient with me. I remember the people that not only encouraged me, but also challenged me. And I think about this church, right here in this church. It was probably about 10 years ago, right here in this church, somebody out of love, because they cared about me and they saw a gap in my life. They said, Brett, you give up on people too easy. You write them off too fast. You got to give them room. You've got to give them opportunity. You've got to show them grace. You can't expect them to move at your speed just because that's the speed you want to move at. You can't write them off. And as soon as I heard that, because they did it in such a wonderful and gracious way, as soon as I heard that, 2 things went off in me. I don't like that. And you're right. You're right. I do. And I've been working on it. And I'd love to say that gap is completely closed, and that never happens, but it's still there. And in one way, the reason that it's getting closer and closer and closer to getting closed is because of you. Specifically, we have an elder team in our church. These are people from our church that you have said, we want you to be our spiritual leaders. They're not paid, it's not their job, they got regular jobs and families and everything else. But they love this church, they love you, and they lead, they use their gifts to lead us spiritually. And I'll be honest with you, I meet with them once a month, and that is so often the highlight of my month. Because when I sit down with those guys and we talk about what God's doing, it just changes me and it impacts me. And they pray for me and they encourage me, even though they don't know they're doing it. They encourage me. They call me to be accountable, to be a good pastor. They tell me the things I'm doing well. They encourage me about the things where we need help. And I don't know that the gaps in my life would be closed the way they've been closed if it wouldn't been for that group. And it's no different for you. You need that same thing in your life. You see, the church, get rid of the name, get rid of the building, doesn't really matter. The church is you and I following Jesus and loving each other, being responsible to each other, being responsible for each other. We normalize what nobody else does. We see it as normal to get into a small group and meet in somebody's home and talk about the Bible and pray for each other and walk through the hard things of life with each other. We see that as normal. We see it as normal to gather together, to worship God, to give generously, to be transformed, and to invite anybody and everybody from the outside that wants to come and be a part of it to join us, and we make room for them at the table because we want them here with us. That's just normal life if you're part of a church. That's who we are. See, we must be people who come close, people who engage, and people who choose to stay. We come close. We've already kind of talked about that. We've just been talking about engaging, and we also choose to stay because here's the truth, and you know this. Again, we're different from what happens out there. What happens out there is, as long as you agree with me, as long as you support me, as long as you don't do anything that makes me mad, as long as you're willing to get behind whatever I think is a good idea, we're together. We're the same people. But as soon as you cross one of those lines, I'm cutting you off. I'm done with you. You're canceled. I don't want you in my life anymore. But that's not us. We choose to stay, even when we don't agree. We choose to stay, even when you disappoint. We choose to stay, even if you make a bad decision, because we're responsible to and responsible for each other. And a mistake and a failure and a bad decision, or even just a different decision, doesn't mean that we're leaving, because we belong. We're responsible. It's always been this way. Relationships have always worked like this. And the reason being is because you were made in the image of God. And one of the things that we know about God is in an eternal relationship. He made you with this drive in you to connect. And it's not like a drive to eat more, to do something that's good for you, right? Like you should eat more vegetables. No, it's not that kind of thing. It is I'm going to constantly be frustrated. I'm going to constantly feel like I'm missing out. I'm going to constantly lose out on life if I don't have this connection. That I'm connected to God and I'm connected to others that are following him. And my life can never be what it's supposed to be without that. Which you might ask, well, if that's the case, why is it so hard? Why does it feel so frustrating? I mean, how come every time it seems like I make a little bit of progress, I go backwards? How come every time I kind of get connected with somebody and feel like, oh, there's a friendship there, there's a real thing there that I get hurt or I get disappointed? Why do I feel lonely so much? Part of the answer, big part of the answer, is you have an enemy. You have an enemy that wants to thwart anything and everything that God has done that is good. It's like his whole purpose is to figure out, how can I mess up the good things that God has done? How can I frustrate the things that he's built in to these people that he loves? How can I cause problems? How can I get them to fight each other instead of fighting for each other? Because it doesn't really matter what the issue is. If I can get them to fight each other instead of fighting for each other, it'll derail whatever God has planned for them. You're always being pushed. You're always being challenged. And so, how do you push back? How do you fight back? And I want to give you two simple ideas, things you can actually take and work on right now. How do you push back? I get it. I want to belong. I realize I have to be responsible. I know that it starts with me, and I've got to be willing to share and contribute, and I've also got to realize that people are going to help me. So how do I make it happen? The first thing is actually so simple to say and so hard to do, is to be available. Just to simply be available. To recognize there's people in your life and there's stuff going on in their life. And I want to be available to them. Like, obviously the big things, somebody's getting married, somebody's having a baby, somebody got a promotion, somebody's dealing with some struggles or some losses, somebody's trying to fight through a difficult time, somebody's got just big life stuff happening. I want to be available. I want to be there. I want to be part of it. I got to connect with them. I got to value them because things are happening in their life. And I want to be available. I want to engage because I'm responsible to them and I'm responsible for them. And in a very real sense, some of that is just looking at the calendar, right? If it is so full with everything else that I don't have room or time to do that, that's a problem. That's a problem. And here's where it happens for me. Maybe your situation's similar. Where it happens for me is, if I'm not careful, I will prioritize the things on my calendar over the people in my life. Like, I'll make sure I get all the things done, but it doesn't leave any time for the people. And I feel like I'm being really productive. I feel like I'm getting a lot of stuff done. I feel like I'm really making progress, really making a difference. But the reality is, I've done a lot of things, but I haven't lived a lot of life with the people that God put around me. And I've got to constantly be on guard for that. And maybe you're in the same boat. We've got to be available. Second thing, almost just as simple, is to go deep. To go deep. I don't know about you, I'm a little bit extroverted. I'm used to being around people. I've kind of done a church thing, not in this role, but I've done a church thing most of my life. I can have a meaningless conversation with small talk for 10 minutes with somebody. It's like that. It's not hard at all. It doesn't bother me. It's no big deal. I can do that. And we can talk for 10 minutes and walk away, and they think, oh, he's a nice guy. And I'm like, oh, I'm glad I met them. And we didn't talk about anything, right? That's easy to do. And a lot of us, that's kind of how we move through life. These little shallow conversations of the weather and what's going on in sports and this and that. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I get that. But if that's all of our conversations, it's going to be really hard to be responsible to and responsible for, to have the belonging, to engage with people. And one of the ways you change that is very simple. You just ask important questions. One of them is so simple. How you doing? What's the normal response? Fine. Okay. How you doing? Fine. How you doing really? Oh. You just add that one word, get them started and then just add that one word and allow them to share how they're really doing. You'll be surprised. You'll be shocked if you listen to what they have to say and to share. If they're in a time of their life where they feel frustrated and they feel like they're struggling, simply ask them, what's the frustration? What's going on? As a follower of Jesus, a great question. Well, what's God doing in your life right now? What do you think he's trying to tell you? What do you think he wants you to do next? And I know some of you guys are out there, especially guys, you're like, I'm not talking to some other dude about his feelings like all the time. I don't do that. I'm not saying every conversation has to be a Hallmark moment, right? I'm simply saying get past the shallow and be willing to talk about what matters. Find people that will call you out and call you up to better. Don't settle for getting by. Who wants to get by? That's not how you were created. That's not what you were designed for. You were designed to engage, to have belonging. You need the people in your life that will stop you. Like, what? What do you mean? I've seen this happen in my own life. You've probably seen it happen too. Every once in a while, metaphorically, we're cruising along in our life and we get a bad idea, or we get under some bad influence, or we just get kind of this wild hair and think this is a good idea. And we start driving fast towards a cliff. It's immoral. It's outside of God's design. It's not what's best for us. It's not going to look good. It's not going to end well. And we don't see it. And we are speeding up as we get ready to go over that cliff. And here's what you need in your life, and here's what I need in my life. I need somebody that's willing to yell at me and say, stop. I need somebody that's willing to jump in front of me and get me to swerve. I don't know about you. I need somebody to tackle me and knock me down and say, you are going the wrong direction. This is going to hurt you. I don't need somebody that will sit there and applaud and say, oh, you be true to you. You do you. Whatever your truth is, you follow it, as they see me getting ready to crash my life. That is not what I need. That's not what you need. So responsible to each other. We're responsible for each other. And sometimes it even means having hard conversations. And when you start to go deep, sometimes that's exactly what you get. Now, as a church, we see a world around us that's not like what we just described. It's not. We got a world around us where people are discarded, where people are thrown away, people are left out, people are not included because they don't agree, they don't do this, they don't do that. But that's not who we are. See, who we are is we are people that realize that we have some gifts to contribute, and we have some gaps to close, and we have some people that we belong to and belong with. And if we are willing to engage that, it changes everything. Yeah, we pick up some responsibility along the way. We have to start being responsible to each other and responsible for each other. But what we get out of that is the life that God intended for us to live in the first place. So let me tell you a couple of things that you can jump into today. The first goes right back to that idea of simply being available. Check your calendar. If you're just too busy to engage, you need to stop. You need to change your calendar. And I know that sounds bold and brave and brash, but I'm just telling you, if you want the life that God has for you, you can't schedule every minute of it. You've got to live in a way that you have room to do life with people. And that's a mindset, and then it's an actual practice that has to happen on a regular basis. Another thing that you might want to do, and it's in the notes if you got them today, we're going to send you an email later. You may want to jump into this Moving Forward course that we have. It's a video course. It takes a couple of days a week, and then you meet with a group of folks. Maybe there's people in your small group that want to do it with you. Maybe you want to do it with your family. You can go to the intro page and find out all about it. We're going to send you the information. But it is a great way for you to grow spiritually, and do it in context of doing it with other people. Because as you grow closer to Christ and you engage other people, you're going to find this belonging happens in a way that's almost hard to describe. And maybe that's a step that you need to take. The last thing I want to tell you is October 2nd. Mark this on your calendar since you're already thinking about your calendar. It's a Sunday. It's about 2 or 3 weeks from today. We are going to do something different here. And so if you're online with us, I would encourage you to consider, maybe I need to be here. Maybe I need to be in person that day, because we're going to do a completely different kind of service. It is going to be one of those experiences that you don't want to miss. That if you do miss it, you're going to hear people talking about it, and you're going to think to yourself, man, I wish I had been there. I wish I had done that. So I'm trying to give you enough warning. We'll give you a lot more details when we get ready, but we're going to feed you. There's going to be stuff for kids. There's going to be stuff for families. It's just going to be an amazing day. And maybe the easiest thing you could do today as a next step is simply make sure that I put on my calendar, be at Mountain Ridge on October 2nd. Because it is going to be a fantastic time that you don't want to miss as we take what we've been talking about throughout this whole series and put it into practice that very day. Let's pray together.